Tonight we are looking at 3 horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. A calcite shelf lets go under a photographer in Son Doong, the cave so vast it makes its own weather. A flood pulse catches the winch engineer halfway up the wire at Gaping Gill, and both dive computers die at once, 40 meters deep in Zacaton, the deepest sinkhole on Earth. Each story starts with confidence and ends in chaos. As always, viewer discretion is advised. True. On March 9, 2025, Ben Okafor carried a camera into the underground dark of Hang Son Doong in Vietnam, a cave so vast that clouds form inside it, with a jungle under one collapsed skylight and passages that could hold a city block. His permit had taken 2 years. He was the expedition photographer, the man sent ahead to the calcite terraces while the team rigged behind him. Ben was 35 years old, a photographer who had logged 11 expeditions on 4 continents, and his daughter chose which photo got framed after every trip. Her rule was strict: no people in it, just the place. He had never once broken it. Here is what you need to understand about Son Doong. The scale is the hazard. Help is not a shaft away. The cave runs 5 kilometers, and a hurt man near the far terraces is a 2-day carry from the entrance, over dunes, boulders, and wet calcite. Expedition doctrine prices it plainly. Rockfall below the second Dolin means a stretcher case, 12 carriers, and every hour of delay adds an hour of dark to the carry. If you get hurt in the biggest cave on the planet, you have already started a 2-day problem. The route in ran the classic line: down the entrance ramp on rope, along the underground riverbed gone dry with the season, past the first skylight where the cloud sits against the ceiling like weather that lost its way. By the second evening, 30 hours in, Ben was where he wanted to be, alone on the high calcite terraces with his tripod, 60 meters above the team's camp lights, shooting the cave's own clouds at the edge of his headlamp's reach, drips ticking around him like a room full of slow clocks. At the third terrace, that is the moment the ground stopped being ground. A calcite shelf that had held for centuries chose that footstep to let go, a crack running under his boots like ice on a pond. His footing had already failed before the sound reached him, because calcite breaks clean, and it breaks late. What he didn't know, riding the slab down 3 meters onto the terrace below, the slab was coming with him. And that photograph would cost the expedition its schedule. The slab landed across his lower leg and settled into the terrace like it was going back to sleep. He pulled once. Nothing moved. Panic knocked on schedule. Nobody home. He answered with arithmetic instead, the way expedition briefings drill it. Injured, pinned, 60 meters of scream between him and camp. And this is the part that decides everything with a pinned limb. The slab does not need to be lifted. It needs to be levered 1 centimeter. And the whole problem is finding a fulcrum before shock finds you, because you do not lift rock, you outsmart it. Watch the account the cave now held. 1 man pinned on a terrace, an ankle going numb in under 10 minutes beneath a slab the size of a door. 12 carriers needed for a stretcher case, in a team of 9. And a 2-day carry to daylight that would begin only after the levering, the splinting, and the argument about whether he could hop. His whistle brought the camp up the terraces in 11 minutes. The levering took 3 tries. Tripod legs snapping first, then a bar of aluminum from a pack frame, then 2 meters of hardwood the porters had carried in for exactly nothing, until exactly now. The slab rolled a hand's width and he was out, with a lower leg the medic splinted by headlamp while the terraces dripped around them and somebody made the joke about the photo. Nobody laughed harder than Ben, and nobody heard the shake in it better than the medic. The carry took 2 days, as the doctrine promised. 9 people rotating 4 corners of a litter over dunes and boulders, the cave's own clouds crossing the headlamp beams above them. The porters sang the count at every lift, the way they sang it in the fields above, and Ben apologized at every rest stop until the medic formally banned the word. At the second Dolin, they timed the last pitch for morning and hauled him up the entrance ramp into daylight 52 hours after the shelf let go. Ben survived with a fractured fibula and a report that ruled the shelf sound-looking and hollow. It had not failed by weight, the engineers wrote, but by a wet season's undercutting that nobody alive had seen. The expedition's route notes now mark the high terraces in red, 2 at a time, roped, and never for a photograph. His daughter framed the last frame on the card that season. The cave's clouds, no people in it, shot 4 minutes before the crack, and she allowed one exception to her own rule. A second, smaller print for the expedition hut, with 9 carriers in it and her father on the litter, waving. The big one hangs in the hallway with a caption she wrote herself, quoting the report's own verdict, "Because he survived it, and she checked." And Ben reads it to every audience he shows the cave with weather to. The biggest room in the world still counts its visitors, 1 footstep at a time, 52 hours from the sky. True. On August 23, 2025, Alma Prue rode a winch chair down through cold spray into Gaping Gill on the Yorkshire moors, a shaft 100 meters straight down where Fell Beck pours over the lip into the dark, a waterfall swallowed by a hole in a sheep field. The chamber at the bottom is so large that a cathedral would fit inside it with room to spare, and she was going down to service the guide wires before the public weekend, the way she had 1,000 times. Alma was 52 years old, the club's winch engineer for 2 decades, a woman who had bolted, greased, and trusted all 100 meters of that wire, clamp by clamp. Her husband ran the tea tent on meat weekends, 200 teas a day, and every Saturday she sent the first chair down empty at dawn, as a check, before any person rode it. Here is what you need to understand about Gaping Gill. The shaft is the flood drain for the whole moor. The club diverts Fell Beck into side passages for the meets, but the diversion is a polite request, not a wall. After hard rain on the fells, the beck can double in under an hour and take its old road back. And the old road runs exactly where the wire hangs, down the middle of the main shaft, through the waterfall's own window. If you ride that wire, you are trusting a weather forecast with your bathwater. The ride down takes 1 minute. The sheep field shrinking to a coin of gray sky, the spray thickening, the roar building, and then the floor of the great chamber opening out 100 meters below the grass. Alma spent the morning at the bottom on the guide anchors, radioing her checklist up to the surface crew in the tea tent calm of a clear Saturday. 40 meters of wire coiled at her feet. At noon, that is the moment the moor changed sides. A storm cell parked on the fells, and the crew watched Fell Beck rise against the diversion dam a finger width at a time. The diversion had already failed when they rang her down, because peat drains like a squeezed sponge. What she didn't know, clipping onto the wire, the beck would reach its old road while she was on it. And that delay at the anchors would put her inside the waterfall. And that choice would be weighed, later, by people who loved her. The pulse came over the lip when she was at half height, and the shaft changed weather around her. Spray became water. Water became weight. Panic rang the wire. Alma rapped and rode. Above her, the winch crew did the only right thing and kept the drum turning, steady, no faster. And this is the part that decides everything for anyone on a wire in falling water. Speed is not rescue. A swinging chair in a flooded shaft finds the walls, and the walls end the story. The drum must turn steady while the water does its worst, because you cannot winch a pendulum. Watch the arithmetic on the wire. 40 meters of shaft left, at a winch pace of 1 meter a second. 40 seconds that were about to become the longest of her 52 years. A flood pulse putting a river's weight onto a body's shoulders in surges. And under the waterfall's core, breath itself becoming a timed skill. 1 gasp in the gaps, 2 seconds of nothing in the white. She did what winch crews drill and tourists never learn. Chin down, elbows locked through the chair frame, breathing in the eddies behind her own shoulders. She counted the meters by the guide wire clamps thudding into her glove, 1 every 4 seconds. The radio in her chest pocket crackled her husband's voice from the tea tent, counting the same clamps off the drum meter, steady as a metronome, and she matched her breathing to his numbers because it was the only clock she could hear over the roar. At 12 meters, the pulse crested, and the waterfall leaned off her, and the coin of gray sky came back overhead, growing. Hans took her harness at the gantry and pulled her over the lip into the sheep field, where she sat in the mud in a puddle of her own making and asked, in the flat voice of the nearly drowned, whether the drum bearings had run hot. They had not. Her heart had, and it stopped in the tea tent 20 minutes later, in front of the man whose voice had counted her up the wire. The club defibrillator ran 4 cycles. The air ambulance flew her off the moor. Alma Prue died that evening in Leeds, of a heart the cold water had asked too much of, 1 hour after walking away from the shaft. The inquest ruled cold water cardiac stress, not drowning, and noted what every caver in the tent already knew. The winch crew's steady drum and the counted clamps had done everything right, and the water had simply outpriced a 52-year-old heart. The report's last line ordered weather holds at half the old rain threshold. The meets still run at Gaping Gill, and the first chair still goes down empty at dawn. But now it is called Alma's chair, and the winch crew sends it with the drum meter zeroed to her last count. The chamber below is still large enough to hold a cathedral. The Beck still takes its old road after rain, and the club now refuses, in writing, to have anyone on those 100 meters of wire when it does. True. On May 30th, 2026, Mara Ellis splashed into the warm blue water of El Zacaton in Mexico, the deepest water-filled sinkhole on Earth. A flooded shaft that swallowed a robot probe for 319 meters before the bottom finally answered. Floating islands of grass drift on its surface, and divers call the view down the blue throat the long question. She went in as deep support for a science team, with twin tanks, 2 Deco bottles, and a plan that ended at 90 meters. Mara was 34 years old, a technical diver who had logged 500 dives supporting survey teams, and her habit was famous on every boat. Every dive, she wrote the full decompression schedule on a wrist slate in grease pencil, then never looked at it. The computer did the looking. The slate was for a day she hoped would stay hypothetical. Here is what you need to understand about decompression. At 90 meters, your blood quietly takes on gas like a shaken bottle takes on fizz, and the only safe way back is a staircase of timed stops that lets the fizz out slowly. Skip the staircase, and the fizz comes out inside you. The computer counts the stairs. Lose the computer, and the count does not stop existing. It just stops being counted. The drop down the throat was the easy hour. Warm water, visibility forever, the science team's line lights strung down the wall like a runway at night. She met the survey pair at 90 meters, handed off the fresh sensor package, checked her gauges, 150 bar, 11 minutes of bottom time, on plan, and turned for the long staircase home. At the first stop, that is the moment the dive changed languages. Her computer flashed a battery icon it had never shown on the boat, blinked twice, and locked itself into a screen of dashes. The instrument had already failed her, because a cold-soaked battery lies on the surface and confesses at depth. What she didn't know yet, tapping the dead glass, the backup on her other wrist had drunk from the same case of batteries. And that habit would now count her whole way home, and this delay would stretch her air to its last 30 bar. The backup blinked once and joined the strike, and both her windows into the mathematics went dark at 42 meters. 2 screens of dashes, no depth, no time. Panic tapped the glass. She looked away from it. Her wrist slate was already turning toward her eyes, the staircase all there in grease pencil, in her own handwriting. Because this is the oldest law in technical diving. Computers are convenience, not truth. The truth is a table, a depth gauge, a timer, and divers carried all 3 home for 50 years before the first screen ever blinked. Watch what she had left to count with. 1 analog depth gauge on the console, fogged but moving. 1 mechanical bottom timer, older than her certification, ticking twice a second in its brass case. And 68 minutes of written staircase between her blood and the surface, in 8 steps, none of them optional. She ran it like bookkeeping, her regulator hissing the tempo. Depth by the fogged needle, Minutes by the brass timer clicking in its case. Stops by the slate. 9 meters for 12 minutes. 6 meters for 19. The numbers checked and rechecked against a mind that wanted very much to rush. The science team's runway lights climbed past her one stop at a time, and at 6 meters, their safety diver arrived with a spare computer held out like a bouquet. She waved it off and tapped the slate. Finish the count you started. That is the law's second line. The last stop ran 19 minutes under the floating grass islands, their roots hanging down into the blue like chandeliers, the water creaking faintly as the islands shifted over her with the breeze she could not feel. Mara Ellis surfaced 69 minutes after her screens went dark, 1 minute over her own handwriting, with 30 bar in reserve and a grease pencil worn to a stub. She survived on paper and brass, and the debrief report gave the save 1 line before spending 3 pages on the battery case that had cold-soaked overnight in a truck bed. Both computers had failed on a single point, 1 case of cheap cells. The team's standard changed at the next briefing. Batteries from 2 different cases, charged in 2 different rooms, and a written schedule on every wrist. No exceptions for the deepest sinkhole on Earth, and none for the shallowest spring either. Mara still writes the staircase in grease pencil before every dive, and she still hopes never to look at it. The report's verdict is laminated into the team's briefing folder now, 68 minutes of it, and she survived every one of those minutes on a slate that cost $4, hanging in 319 meters of open blue with nothing but her own handwriting holding the ceiling up. At Zacaton, the long question got a short answer that day, and she gives it to every support diver she trains. The cave only respects the numbers you can still read when every screen in your world shows dashes.